Hey everyone, thanks for joining us. It's around 1:30, so we'll get started. I'm Emily Timpey, and I'll be facilitating today's webinar. During today's presentation, attendees will be in listen-only mode. If you experience any technical problems, please use the questions pane of the GoToWebinar control panel. We'll be monitoring that area, especially during the start of the presentation, so we can offer assistance if you need it. You may also use the questions pane at any time during the presentation to ask questions you may have during the talk, but remember that your questions won't be addressed until the end of the webinar. But feel free to type some questions in for the end. So we're pleased to have Steve Ansari with us today. Steve is the U.S. Drought Portal Program Manager at the National Centers for Environmental Information, NCEI, in Asheville, North Carolina, previously NCDC. Steve has a background in a variety of GIS, data management, and visualization activities within NOAA, including radar, satellite, severe weather datasets, as well as the primary author of the NOAA Weather and Climate Toolkit software application. Prior to joining NIDIS, Steve was the NCEI Manager for the Operations, Software Development, and Hosting of Climate.gov. So Steve, whenever you're ready, you can go ahead.
All right, thank you very much. Okay, well, hello everyone out there on this webinar. Thanks for having me. And we'll dive right in. So we'll be talking about the Weather and Climate Toolkit today. And this is a follow-up to a presentation that Mike Brewer gave at a previous meeting. So I'm going to start by listing some resources here. And actually, I was going to do this ahead of time. I forgot. I was going to drop some of these in a chat window. Do we have, looking on my go-to, so that you guys have these. Oops, let's get the full Google URL. Anyway, I'll throw these in as we go, but let's see if this will work. I guess because it's a Drive presentation, Google is prefixing all of my links with its little search magic. But hopefully everybody's getting these links here, and hopefully they work. So feel free to follow along within the software or within the tutorials as we go. Okay, so the Weather and Climate Toolkit. If I can get back to my presentation here. Here we go. This is a free public domain application developed here at NOAA's National Centers for Environmental Information, and that's formerly the National Climatic Data Center. So it used to be NCDC. As of a year and a half, 2 years ago, we're NCEI now, National Centers for Environmental Information. And it's a desktop and command line application that provides simple visualization and data export functionality for weather and climate data. It runs on Windows, Mac, Unix, Linux. It's based on community tools and standards like NetCDF for Java, Common Data Model, and others that are developed at UCAR Unidata. And it's been used by government, EDU, private sector, military, others for 10 plus years. It's been out there a little while and has a good cross-section of users in different sectors using the application. So what kind of data types does it support? It supports raw data files that are on disk or in a remote location, such as any remote URL, a Threads data server, OpenDAP, etc. It supports NetCDF 3, NetCDF 4, Grib1, Grib2, Ginny, HDF, and other formats that are supported within the Unidata Common Data Model set of kind of decoders that they have as part of their NetCDF library. And it supports feature types including grid, swath, radial, time series, and different kinds of features there. So what that means is that in terms of types of data it supports, it includes NexRad, possibly other radar networks as well that are included in the decoders. I know it does support the UF, the universal format of radar. the GOES data that is archived within NCEI, a class system, model data, which includes all the GRIB2 data that's out there on the NOMADS archives and also real-time served up through NCEP, and much, much more. So it provides simple 2D maps, basic overlays of states and counties, etc., background maps, including the Esri kind of street map and satellite, shader relief, those sorts of things. You can save images to standard image formats, and then also animations to animated GIFs and AVIs and KMZs. One of the real powers of the Weather and Climate Toolkit is really that it's a bridge between this raw weather and climate data that's often in difficult to use binary formats and multiple scientific user communities. And that's really where a lot of this originated from, was looking at how can we take some of our data that we sit on at the archive here at NCEI and make it more accessible for people that are not necessarily in the meteorological community. And so we focused on exporting it to GIS formats, and so that's really where a lot of people find, I think, the most unique capabilities in this toolkit is in that it can decode from GRIB and NetCDF and NexRad and GOES satellite formats directly into GIS formats that can be inputted into GIS models and so on. Now ArcGIS supports, and QGIS, the kind of open source analogous product to ArcGIS, supports some of the NetCDF models, the gridded NetCDF model, but at the time when this was originated, it did not. So that was a big part of it, where it came from. So now we're going to just dive into examples, and what I've included in this presentation are, which I can actually share if folks want to. Let's do that. We'll get a link right here. I'm going to drop it into the chat window. If I can find the little plus button for the chat window. Let's see. Okay, so I think I've sent that out, and I think Jenna, thanks Jenna, you're forwarding these on to the whole audience. All right. So with this presentation, I have links here to hopefully kind of follow along with the tutorials as we go. So I'll start by going here to the installation page. And so when we go to the installation page, here we'll see two different options. Well, we'll start at the main page. So the main page gives the general introduction of what it can do, what kind of data formats it supports, and then you can click the download button and go to the download page. So first off, we'll start with that the Weather and Climate Toolkit is a tool. So it's more like ArcGIS or Photoshop or something like that than it is a different sort of kind of tool that includes a lot of data with it sort of as you go, or it kind of handholds you to certain data sets. It does some of that, and we're hoping it can do more of that in the future, but it really is to think of it more like a tool that you would use similar to ArcGIS or Photoshop, where you kind of bring your data to it and use it to do something on the data that you already have or that you already know where it exists. So there's two different types of downloads. There's this web start installation, which you can click the button, and if you have Java installed on your machine, well, either way you're going to need Java installed on your machine. And you can use this web start capability to just launch it right off the web. And for most people that works really, really well, but in some cases it doesn't, and a lot of times it's related to the sort of changing security landscape of Java over the last few years. and as well as organizations. So that may or may not work for you, and it's difficult for me to keep up also with the changes to the Java security requirements in terms of configuring what is needed for this feature to work. So when in doubt, you can go to the standalone download version, and this works well. So if we look at this beta version right here, I'm going to click on it, and it's going to download a zip file. So we can see I've downloaded it many times before, but if we go in here and extract the files, what we have, I can find it in my messy downloads folder here, what we have is on Windows, we'll see that there's some supporting libraries and scripts and whatnot, but we have this executable, and so this is what we really care about, is this executable. And then once you download it and unzip it, you can just double click on it and run it. You don't need any administrative privileges to do this. You just can download, unzip, and run. This is also how a system administrators can deploy this kind of this way to people's systems as well, if they just kind of drop this into some folder somewhere. So that is usually the easiest way to do it. If you're on a Linux environment, you can do it the same way, and then use a symlink or so on to manage changing between versions. If you're on Mac, you can download it as an app bundle, and you can just basically double click on it, and it should run once you unzip it. So you unzip it, and then there will just be a single NOAA logo to click on that should run it. If you run into any problems with the installation, there's instructions down here, particularly on the Mac. There's because this is not signed through the App Store, you have to go through some steps here. It's not too bad, but basically you have to kind of equivalent of right-click on the application to be able to accept these security dialogues that pop up. So there should be instructions. There are instructions on these, which are hopefully current. If they're not, please let me know on the website. All right. So once we have this up and running, let's go back to my tutorial here. What was I going to show? GOES data. So there's a whole slew of data sets that we can use here, and if we start with GOES data, there's a tutorial here that talks about how to order the satellite data from the class system, and it can be a little bit frustrating and complicated at first, but it's not too bad once you get the hang of it. But at the end of an order, what you will end up with is, so here's an order that I had just put in, and you kind of fill your shopping cart, and then you send in your order, and you get this confirmation number or your order number. And this is what you can use to retrieve your data when it's ready. It's also one of the things that in here in the Weather and Climate Toolkit, so once this opens, you have this main view window, then you have this data selector window. And this is the beta version I'm using right here, which is hopefully going to be the stable version very soon. So it's pretty stable, and I'd certainly recommend using it if possible. And so you can put your order number right in here. With radar data and satellite data, they both are behind these ordering interfaces where you have to order the data off Tape Robotics and have them put on a FTP site to download. And so this toolkit supports the order numbers for these orders, so you can put in your order number and hit list files, and it'll go out and list the files that you have. And then once you have that, you can click, and what it's doing is going out and downloading the file. So here we have infrared, band 4, which is infrared, GOES data for Hurricane Matthew that I put in the order for. And so it's pulled that file across, and now you can zoom in and zoom out and look at the event. So to kind of walk through maybe some of the features of the interface here. So you can zoom in, zoom out. You can use your mouse wheel to zoom in, zoom out, pan around. You can add bookmarks if you wanted to. You know, webinar that are going to remember, you know, where you are. So, like I'd made one before called "Does Zoom Somewhere." Zoomed in very closely, but then we can go back to webinar if we wanted to save that. You can save your session, which will have your data source and your view and your layers saved right there. We can go in here to the map selector, and all of these things are covered in the tutorials. You can go into this map selector, and you can change your color table for satellite and gridded data. So there's some satellite ones in here. You can change your overlays. So if you wanted to turn counties on and off, and look at where the eye wall is, zoom in, turn on counties, change the color to something so it's easier to see, and then maybe label them. You can do that. And that's all using data that is prepackaged with the toolkit, so it doesn't need to do remote sort of requests for these data sets. If you have custom data and shapefiles you want to load, you can do that. It's pretty primitive. It'll just show the dots or the lines or shapes on the map. You can't really do much more than change the color of the outline of the line or the line of them. But that's sort of the kind of the general theme of this. It's meant to be sort of a lightweight viewer. To get into something like that, you'd want to, you know, with fancy labeling and so on, you'd want to use a full-on GIS tool. You can also use these background maps. So here's the Esri roads background map. We can apply some transparency here. We can, let's see, go back, hide our overlays so that all we have is the map right there. And then you can zoom in and it'll update, it'll make a new request for the map service, and you can, you know, get all the way down to the street level. Okay, so we'll zoom out a little bit. Some of the other tools that are in here I'll go through quickly. There's a marker tool, so if you wanted to click here and add these markers, you can add a label, and it's going to remember these markers that you put in. And you can actually use these for some other stuff, which I'll show a little bit later on how we can use these markers. You can import and export these markers as well. It's just a CSV file, so if you can look at the format, and if you wanted to pull in your own markers, that's certainly possible, or save them. You can come in here, use this identify tool, and click around. Well, let's hold on. Where's my window for that? Well, I'll have to take a look at that. What's going on with that tool? I'll try it in a second with a different data set. You can come in here and do some location searching as well, where you can put in a name of a place, and then it'll try to find it and add the marker for you. And this uses the Google location search API. So yeah, there's some different options with that. Now, let's say that you wanted to look at this on Google Earth. I have to make my window smaller here because my GoToMeeting overlay is on this right side. And you can pan over here and hit Launch KMZ or Save KMZ, and it will open it onto Google Earth. It'll give you ask you some questions about if you want to drape it or use the actual vertical level if there's a height that is available in the data. We're just gonna, this does not have a height associated with it. So there we go. And now it's in, I've been able to export it to Google Earth. Some other things that are really handy are this copy image, which takes the image that you're looking for and copies it to the clipboard, which is great, so that if you're, for example, making a PowerPoint presentation for a webinar, you could come in here and you know, copy that to your clipboard and then just paste it right into PowerPoint or into Google Docs, which comes in handy. We can, so this data right now is all from the remote server. I'd actually downloaded this to a folder, which you can actually do right through the export capability. So if we go, we'll get into data export in just 1 second, but that's one of the options here. So we can take these, highlight them, and animate or export them right down. I'm going to go to the ones I have on the local file system so that we don't have to, it will animate a little bit faster, but we'll try to make an animation here. So this reset zoom, I'm going to unclick that so that it doesn't pop me back out to my default extent every time. I'm going to highlight multiple. You see that the load button goes away. I'm going to hit animate. And we have some options here. Do we want to load this into its own internal player, export each frame individually to an image file, directly export a movie? This is kind of like streaming a movie out, which allows you, because you're not caching it internally in memory, it allows you to do a very, very large, long movies with, I mean, really tens of thousands of frames if you wanted to. Let it run for hours and just stream it out to a movie file. Or you can export it to a KMZ file with multiple time steps that lets you animate it in Google Earth as well. So we're just going to take the simplest option here and just load it into the Toolkit's viewer. And we'll see it goes through here, and we can see the images that it's making as it processed. That went pretty fast. And then when we get out of this are these images that are in this viewer. We can rock back and forth and change the speed, and then from here even export it to a movie. So if we wanted to take it and export it to you know, hurricane test, something like that. Now it's going to export that movie. Depending on your admin privileges and so on with your folder, or how your Windows Media Player allows things to be configured based on your admin privileges, it may or may not just directly open, but it'll fall back on opening the folder, which you can then double click on to see the movie. So here we're in Windows Media Player now. We can see the movie that we made, and because we had the rock checkbox checked, it's going to do the movie going forwards and then backwards, and add those frames in reverse sort of at the end, so that you get that rock effect when you're on your movie that you have. Okay, so let's hop back. I'm going to skip, in lieu of time, I want to make sure we get to some of these other data sets as well. We'll show how, well, I can show how we export this. We can do this real quick. How we export this into ArcGIS. So here we would select a file, or we can select multiple files, and hit export. And it's going to ask us what format do we want. And so there's a number of different formats that we can use to export the data. And we can see here that there are options for vector formats, point line polygon, or raster formats, or gridded formats. And so for the point data, it's going to export the centroid of the grid cell as a point. For the gridded data, it's going to, raster formats, it's going to resample it to a lat long grid, and you're going to get a gridded output of that. So we can show real quick maybe both options. We can do a shapefile. I'll hit next, go through here. We can adjust if we want the whole data set or just what we're looking at. By default, it uses the spatial filter of what we're looking at. We can filter on any of the values. Let's say if we just wanted the really cold cloud top temperatures, hit next and then start. And so it did that. And I'm going to pull up our map here. So here's an example. I was making sure or preparing for this, and here's an example of a raster output that I pulled in as GeoTIFF. And I'll go here and look, and here's an example of, let's see. Of shapefile. So it gives us a little bit of a warning here that I don't have the current projections or coordinate system set at 983. I'm just going to ignore that. That's fine. And so here we go. And so as we zoom in, we can see a whole grid of points. But if we apply some styling to that, and maybe take away the outline here, and let's see. Route of flip. I don't remember. Well, it's kind of the wrong way here, but there we go. So the point stuff is, why would you use points in this kind of situation from a gridded data set? But it gives you some flexibility in that you can do some geospatial operations, like if you wanted to find how many people were using census blocks, how many people were within cloud top temperatures that were less than such and such degrees. You could do that very easily with this still being in a point format. And then you can also, let's say you were making a map in an Albers or Lambert projection, you could easily then interpolate this onto a grid without in the projection that you're making your map in, and you don't lose any precision that you would have if we resampled it twice. So if we resampled it from the native GOES projection into lat long, and then from lat long into Albers or something else. So the point export actually is really powerful for those reasons. Okay, back to find my bearings here. All right, so we're going to hop on to radar data. So I love radar data. My background is in radar data stuff, which I worked on for years before taking over the NIDIS portal manager stuff, which is fantastic. But if we go, where am I going? Wrong presentation. Here we go. So radar data, we archive all of this radar data here at NCEI. We have over 400 terabytes of it. This is the NexRad weather radar data that the National Weather Service produces and sends to us, and we archive it. And there's, as many are familiar with, we have these level 3 products, which include things like precipitation estimates and storm tracking and hail estimates, and composite reflectivity, and so on. And then we also have the raw level 2 radar data, which has the whole volume scan, or 3D volume scan. And so the Weather and Climate Toolkit provides really, really good support for radar data. And one of the neat projects that I've had the privilege of being involved in over the last 2 years is the NOAA Big Data Project. And that was an effort to, or is an ongoing effort to utilize the private cloud resources in a collaboration with NOAA to help make the access to large data sets more usable and possible, and co-located with computing, so that people can do more with the NOAA data, more with the radar data, and so on. So the level 2 NextRad archive was the first data set that was used in this project, and so the entire archive was copied over. We still have the archive here, but the entire archive was copied over to several of these collaborators on the NOAA Big Data project, including Amazon and others. And Amazon and the Open Cloud Consortium are the first ones of the collaborators that have provided public access for these data sets. So what this all means is that there's a tab, the Weather and Climate Toolkit. We've stubbed out an area where it can feature the data sets that are being included on this NOAA Big Data project. And right now, NextRad Level 2 is the first one, and Amazon's the first provider. But there's others that may come along and provide additional access. So let's say if IBM or Google provides access to a different data set, we could build this section out to support that. But right now we have Amazon and we have NextRad Level 2 data. And so what this means is that instead of going, as we did for the GOES data, we had to put in an order to the class system and wait for some time for the order to come back. I think it was for small amounts of data, 10, 15 minutes. But it's really difficult when you have to order, a whole year's worth of data. That's really not possible in a single order. And but now this data is accessible, at least for NextRad Level 2, instantly from Amazon. So if we go here, one of the things we can do is look right at these products here, right on the Amazon, looked at on the Amazon storage environment. So let's see here. Let's stay in the context of this hurricane. It was October 7th. And so if we look at, here we're already on Jacksonville on October 7th. Let's look later in the day there. Let's look at the end of the day. We hit reset zoom. And what it's going to do now is download the file from Amazon and then to the local cache and then display it. So one of the differences between the Weather and Climate Toolkit and a traditional GIS tool is that it kind of handholds you through this idea of the layers. And so it really, by default, supports one active layer at a time instead of multiple layers that you kind of have to check on and off to manage in a GIS. It's not trying to be a GIS system. It's trying to be more of a lightweight viewing tool. That said, there are some things that you can do if you wanted to come in here. There's a snapshot capability. So if you came in and you press this snapshot, this is going to take a snapshot of the data, not the map image, but the data that you have just in your view, and store it sort of as a layer over here in the special part of layers menu, map layer selector. You have snapshot layers. So let's say I wanted to compare something. I wanted to compare, let's say, radial velocity with base reflectivity. So I can go in here, display the velocity, hit snapshot again for the velocity, and come in here, and if I just want to look at these snapshots, I can clear the active layer. So I'm just looking at what I just took these two snapshots of, and I can toggle back and forth between these two layers. So I can turn one on, this one's on top. I can change the order. So it gives some of that functionality, some of that GIS-like functionality to look at some layers, but it's meant to be very sort of lightweight. And with that, with sort of reduced functionality of what you can do. So from my snapshot layers, I can actually go in here and reload the parent data. Here's my active layer, so it's going to reload that again. Or I could have just brought up the data selector here and double-clicked on it again. Here it resets the view. So if we go in here to reflectivity, so here's my, it's like a variable selection window, and you can with the satellite data, we didn't have multiple variables. It was just one in each one of those files, so we didn't see that. In gridded data and radial data, we will see when there's more than one variable or dimension to choose from, you will get this window that lets you choose from these variables. So we can come in here, choose reflectivity, look at some of the different angles, elevation angles that we have available to us. We can create a constant altitude slice, which will interpolate at a certain altitude above the Earth from all of these volume scans. And we can come in here and export this to Google Earth. And this is really where there's some really unique functionality, is that you can come in here and we can launch KMZ. And now we have a bunch of different options that we didn't have with satellite data. So we can, one of the things it can do with weather radar data is create a 3D model for Google Earth to drape the image onto that actually represents the centroid of the radar sweep, of the beam, as it's sweeping out in 3D. So we can do that here, and we can select if we want just one sweep, or if we want multiple, and so on. So let's just start with just one, and hit go, and then it's going to open Google Earth and zoom and adjust my time. All right, so now I'm in Google Earth as we're used to. But if we tilt, it's kind of hard to see because we're not far off the ground. If we tilt, we can see that now there's an elevation to this off the ground of this beam. And if we look back here, it's kind of hard to see with this. So what we're going to do is we're going to export more sweeps. So let's go in here and do the whole volume scan. And we're going to, let's do something. Let's clean this up a little bit. So first we can put a little bit of smoothing on this. With radar data, you can add a little bit of sort of kernel-based smoothing. So we've smoothed the data some. We're going to go in here, launch KMZ, do all, and that's probably fine. So that's going to go in here and in the background process the 15 different sweeps that make up this volume scan. While it's doing that, I'm going to remove my, or I can just turn it off, the stuff here I don't need. That's almost done. So it's loading each one of these sweeps now, and now we should be able to see some 3D shape with this. So if we tilt now, we can see, and it has some exaggeration on it, but we can really see how the radar works. Here's the Jacksonville radar, and you can see the radar beams as they are extending from the radar site. All right, so hopefully somewhere out there, I can't hear you guys, but hopefully somebody's saying, okay, that's cool, because that's, you know, this was a big deal for us, especially in how we are able to describe, I mean, just even from an educational perspective of what is happening in this, from the radar site and what it's doing. So let's see here. I'm actually looking at this. This looks a little bit funny. It looks like they might have, I have to look closer at that. I might be taking a leap of faith here with the beta version a little too soon. There's stuff going on, but what we can do, another thing we can do here, because let's double check this. What's going on here? It's this snapshot layer behind here. That's causing the problem. Okay. I think that ended up in our view. Let's do this again. Bear with me. This is a Seat of the Pants webinar. All right, so we're going to go in here. I have a theory on why that looks a little funny. I think it was using that snapshot layer on every different layer that it was saving out there. So we're just going to run through this again real quick. Fingers crossed here, like a live demo. There we go. This looks better. Although maybe it doesn't look quite as cool. So, so we've seen that it's getting the noise, the lower DBZ values are really sort of hiding what's underneath it. And that's why one of the things that you can do here on this export is filter. So if we were to filter this to, like, let's say 25 and add a little bit of transparency here, I bet you, maybe increase this with that, I bet you it's going to look way better as I did the top one. Let's try this one more time. Okay, remember, all sweeps, transparency 30, filter 25. There we go. So as this is processing, let's see. There are links to the tutorials. I should include some of the information about how to do this as well. But sometimes it takes a little bit of experimentation to get it quite right. There we go. Okay, so now this is looking better, right? A little bit better. We kind of get the feeling for the shape of things. This actually, I probably should use like a tornado example because this looks way cooler on tornadoes. Another thing you can do here is create isosurfaces to like three-dimensional contours and show those in Google Earth as well. So if we wanted to make one, let's do, it doesn't look like we're quite that. Let's do 51. So it's doing a three-dimensional contour of certain DBZ values here. Then it'll load these into Google Earth. And so this gives you an idea of the shape of what we're looking at. And you can apply some transparency to make it look kind of cool. And then you can also get this tour with it. So if you double click, it'll do its own automatic tour of what you're looking at. Now this isn't really visually appealing what we have here, but if we would have zoomed in maybe a little bit closer over a certain area, if we just wanted to look at the eye wall, for example, or so on. So with this tour in Google Earth, you can save a movie right from the tour, and it works really, really well. So we've done that for some tornado events And here is an example. I'll throw in maybe tornado. So here's an example of what it looks like on a tornado. So this is the Moore 2013 tornado, and there are some movies here. I'll drop this into the chat and Google Doc that gives some other examples here. Okay, so let's leap into another kind of data set here. So let's look at some climate forecast system, CFS data that's out there on this NCEP site. So if we're here and we're looking at NCEP, and I got these files out here, and we're going to go through here how we wanted to look at one of these in the Weather and Climate Toolkit, and go through, find the directory that has the list of files, copy and paste that, or let's see, it should work to drag and drop it, hopefully. Maybe not onto that window. Onto that window. Well, maybe not. But we can also just come in here for the URL directory and then right-click and do paste. Oh, that's why I didn't. Or Control-V, hit List Files. Then we can go through here, and so here's some Grib2 files. And if we look at, let's look at the T-Max. I'd already downloaded this. That's why it has a little green dot here, so it shows that it's in the cache already. Okay, so if we zoom out here, we can see the data set. I can actually hit reset zoom here if we wanted to, and it'll pop us back to the whole extent. It's still using that map background image. It keeps updating. Well, I guess we can just stick with that. So with this as gridded data, we have this gridded data properties that pops up. And so if there were multiple variables, they'd show up here. Times, so you can see all the different times that are there. If we wanted to filter these, let's say we just wanted to look at the 12Z, you can just do any sort of free text thing and it'll filter it based on that. So these are just the 12Z values. If there are multiple heights, it would give us that as well. If there was a height layer to choose from, but it does just give us this there. Then it also gives us some metadata that comes with the Grib file as well. So if we wanted to animate this, let's say that we just wanted to do the first day of the month, 00. So that kind of makes sense, hopefully, how I did that. So I just used a text field that would go, it would match just the dash 01 part of the date string and then the 00 of the time string. So we can select multiple, hit animate, we have the same choices there. Go in there, oh, it looks like, well, we got the beta version here, so our percentages are a little out of whack. Then we can animate these data as well. Same sort of options, we can export it to a movie. Now one caveat sort of on these animations is that what it's done is it's pre-generated these images, which means the good thing is that you can then animate them, super fast if you want to. You can go through and do, thousands of these images. But the bad thing is you can't zoom in. So once you're looking at this animation at this extent, that you're stuck there. So if you want to zoom in, you have to come back here and then do another animation. So some other things that Weather and Climate Toolkit can do. So it has this math tool. If we want to go in here and process what the minimum value was out of all of these grids, we could do that. It does some very, very basic stuff. Hit start, and it's going to go through here, process those 10 grids, and then display it. Minimum temperature. It gives you a little bit of adjustment over the legend if you want to. Then you can also export this result into a format, into a raster format right here. And then another really interesting new feature is this point subset tool that is one of the newer features that takes the markers that you've made and allows you to do a point subset to determine what the pixel values or radar values or really anything that it supports, what they are at that location. So if we want to find out what these temperature estimates were at the first day of the month in Orlando, we can select the Orlando feature, hit start, and bam, there you go. And then with this, you can just copy this or hit export and save it to CSV there. We can just copy and paste this right into Google Google Sheets, something like that, and make a chart there. Let's see if this works. We have to do the split the values here, which is I'm not exactly trying to do that in Excel super quick. It's really easy to do in it's really easy to do in Excel. But again, the Weather Climate Toolkit's not really meant to be a big graphing and charting tool per se. Although simple stuff, I would think we could add that maybe at some point. But the idea is really getting it out into another tool and doing it that way. So I'll hop back to the presentation. So for exporting, we have the same options for this. One of the things I didn't touch on for the radar data is, so the exporting for this gridded stuff, CFS, is similar to what we saw with the satellite data, where we can export the point centroid, or I can export grids and so on. There's a number of formats here: shapefile, GeoJSON, CSV. For the radar data, you can export it to polygons or points that you can use within a GIS system. So that's a unique capability of the radar. You get polygons or points. And let's see. So I just want to have just a few minutes here, and I'll show some of the other newer features here. One is the MRMS. If we wanted to, there's a new section for data collections, which includes links to some of these threads data servers at different NOAA locations. So there's a whole ton of data right here. So you could click, for example, here's ours. It brings in our threads data server. You can click on this climate data record, program data, look at sea surface temperature. Click there, select something. I'm just clicking through really fast, but now it's remotely accessing our servers and bringing in sea surface temperature. So this is some of that kind of trying to add some curation of data. The MRMS is another fantastic product that NCEP is now serving operationally, which was developed at the National Severe Storms Lab. And so there's a catalog here of the different MRMS products. So if we wanted to look at let's look at hybrid scan and reflectivity. That's happening right now across the country. We go in here. So this is the most current file. And so there's really not much going on. Pretty boring day for demoing any sort of severe weather data sets. Station data forms. So here are under services. the idea that I can clear these. So if we come to, let's say we come to Asheville, where we are, beautiful Asheville, North Carolina. And one of the things that NCEI provides is a service that creates these PDF forms of our station data, which are a little bit easier to read. So we can click here, list stations, in the view extent. It will display the first 100 stations that are within the view that I'm looking at. If we come in here, and we can even zoom in a little farther. Let's do it again. There we go. Get Asheville airports. We can go through here and select them, see how they're being highlighted on the map. And so if you wanted to get the temperature and precipitation data in a form, you can do that pretty easily right here. You can do this on our website as well. But one of the things that is a little bit unique here is that instead of looking at kind of one at a time, you can create a number of these pages from a number of different stations, and then print them out or save them to a PDF. So it gives some additional functionality. Let's see, drought monitor. We can pull in the latest drought monitor and look at that as well. So opposed to some of these different tools. So we are in some drought in western North Carolina. You can create an animation here the same way. So if we go in here and hit animate, we didn't apply transparency, but we could. You know, so this could be, we could be comparing precipitation totals to drought, and showing some different things right in that animation. Here you can apply transparency to make it look better. And then probably the last thing I'm going to show here are these storm reports. So you can come in here and look at the SPC storm reports. If we go back a couple of days to where we found one, I can zoom to the event. And then thanks to the big data project, now we have this data on Amazon. We can directly connect to this 300 terabyte data set and load without even having to order the data, load the level 2 file and look right at the event and look at what's happening there. And so if we can imagine, maybe there'll be other large NOAA data sets on the big data project someday, and we could link to other ones. So this is sort of the data connectivity and interaction that we're hoping to, in the future, this is where I could see more of this going. This is just kind of scratching the surface of what's possible. So to wrap up, why do we do this? And this is really, this stemmed at NCEI out of a stewardship capability, needing to not just drop users off with files on FTP server in a crazy binary format that they had no idea what to do anything with them, but to provide tools that allow them to read the data and get them into formats that they are more comfortable with. It's about interoperability, about promoting standards, providing more tools that are based on the standards, that gives more incentives for the next person launching a satellite to make it in a standards compliant way. And so GOES-R, which is launching here shortly, we're super excited about this because it's going to use CF-NET-CDF format with the NET-CDF with the CF conventions, which will be able to be instantly readable by tools such as the Weather and Climate Toolkit and the many others, hundreds really, of tools out there that can read gridded NET-CDF. And then it's also about enablement, really enabling more people to do more things, more stuff with NOAA data, allowing our data to make more of a difference in people's lives and the economy, and so on. And so here's an example of that the New York Times used, using some of the 3D radar capabilities that I showed earlier. Now, this was really great in a number of ways. I mean, one, they were able to create a 3D model using the Weather and Climate Toolkit but you can see that they're not showing a movie made on Google Earth. They're not showing the Google or the Weather and Climate Toolkit. They're showing they're able to take the data and with their own visualization, people who are not meteorological experts could take it and put it on their own visualization tool that they maintain and that they know resonates with their kind of user bases and allows them to use the colors they want and integrate into their site and so on. And so this was really a huge win because in all of the efforts we've done in presenting of this stuff, in this one article that the New York Times put on, they probably reached more people in that one article than we were able to in 8 years prior. Surely they did. So that's really, I think, what this is all about, is enabling people to do more with the NOAA data and do more in their own environments, not just kind of stuck within necessarily a NOAA portal of things, but to get that data out to them to do really nifty and innovative things with it. That's kind of I think our measure of success and why this tool exists and where I hope it still finds usefulness years from now. So with that, I'll stop. I went a few minutes over. Sorry, Jenna, and pause for questions.
All right, thanks, Steve. We did have a couple of questions come in. Well, we did have one comment, too, that said, it is cool when you were doing the radar visualization, the 3D, so someone else did feel the same way with the coolness.
Oh, great. It's crazy when it's so quiet, You're used to, like, something. That's good to hear. Thank you.
And then our first question, are there any plans for adding support to non-gridded, such as profiles, time series, trajectories, CF-compliant data?
Yes, there actually are, and the toolkit does support some basic capabilities in that area. Let's see if I can find a test of that. It's my trusty test data. So here's an example of a CF netcdf file for a station. And this is just a single station, but it has multiple time steps in it, and you can display the data here, and then also export it to CSV, JSON, or shapefile. So it doesn't provide a whole lot of fancy functionality, but it can provide some of the simple view and export functionality for the time series data in the beta version that's out right now. Thank you for asking that question.
Okay, our next question, does the toolkit have different projections for viewing data? If not, is there a plan to add that?
That's a great question, thank you. No, it does not currently have support for additional projections. There are some other tools out there which are great, like Panoply is one that NASA provides that does some really nice projection support, which you could kind of, if you need to, even export data from netcdf and read it in that tool to do projections, or use a GIS tool. But currently it does not. It only provides the WGS84 or NAT83 lat long projection.
Okay, and I think we have a couple more questions. What are the type of services you point to listed under the services? WMS only? From where? Can you point to IDP REST services? Is where it points configurable? Will the Weather and Climate Toolkit continue to be developed or enhanced?
Great question. So under services, so these, and maybe it's misnamed here, the idea being that these are services that kind of require remote connections to data sources to work. Not quite the same as web services per se. In terms of connecting to the IDP REST services, so for the GIS REST services, no, I don't think there is a way right now to directly connect to those over the kind of Esri REST standard. We could look at, it would be possible to add that probably without a whole lot of effort, potentially, but I'm not sure right offhand kind of what that would entail. So I guess that's sort of a no, or that is a no. It doesn't support that. In terms of future development, that's sort of I think up to be seen, sort of where it can the Weather and Climate Toolkit can add functionality and how that will take shape over the next few years. It's sort of the development sort of slowed on it of late as I've taken on other roles, and we're looking within my division, the Center for Weather and Climate, on how besides sort of operational support, how new development may take place.
Okay, and then our last question that we see, have you heard of AWIPS2 data delivery? It points off to OpenDAP-enabled Nomad servers to allow subsetting for ingest into AWIPS2. This is great for exploring parallel model data. I could see your tool aiding this. I wonder if one could make a class-like request of varies X, Y, and Z from a model for forecast hours A, B, and C. And it would be neat to save that and always get the latest model output for those forecast variables and time steps.
Yes. So for OpenDAP, if you can, so it does support OpenDAP as one of the connections. So if we go here, I went super fast on here, and I hope this is answering the question. If we go in here and look at a Threads data server, I can go in, and one of the options that you get is this. So this is an aggregation, actually, an OpenDAP aggregation, and what it's pulling on here is making an OpenDAP request. So if we had the catalog or the actual OpenDAP URL for the data set, you could go out and have it remotely, access just that slice of the model. Basically, that's sort of what it's doing here, because it's there's a whole this is like a terabyte-sized data set, and it's pulling in just a slice at a time across to visualize. In terms of automating some of that to run every day, and I did not really talk about this, and I perhaps should have. There's a batch processing mode which can run via the command line. So here's the page on the website. There's a batch processing on the left side, a link to it, and many people are using this. And you basically configure this XML file for any filtering or certain options, and then just call the command line, give it the input file or directory output, and so on, and format, and you can do the exports that way. So you could conceivably pull in just a slice of model data that you wanted to and automate creating a data file from it or a KMZ file, and then visualizing it a different way. So there's an example down here that shows how to make a KMZ file and how there's different ways you can do your color scales and so on to do that. You can also send it to another program. So here's an example at the bottom of how you'd use like map server GDAL to generate the image from that data file. So there's some ways to do that for sure.
Okay, thanks, Steve. There was a couple other questions, but we might just take that offline for the sake of time, and so you guys could connect. But we really appreciate it, Steve, and thanks everyone for attending and participating today. As a reminder, it will be posted online off the Climate Services branch webpage. There's a seminar series link, and it will be added there within the next couple days. So thanks again, Steve, and everyone for your participation in the webinar today.
All right, thanks, Jenna.